Chris Saxon with Virginia Free. We are live streaming on YouTube. Joining us from Milwaukee is Dave Rexrode, Executive Director of the Republican Governors Association. Dave, it's great to have you with us here today. What are your lessons? What did you learn from this particular campaign?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really came through in this campaign, I think it's a trend that we've seen the past couple of years in gubernatorial races, is folks are really looking for candidates and leaders that are going to tackle the problems that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, the past year and 8.5 with COVID, I think we saw our governors across the country on both sides being viewed in a different light, put in a different view of how they have to do their jobs. And so I think the one thing that was certainly clear in this race is, focusing on the issues that were impacting Virginians, whether it was the rising cost of gas and food prices, or obviously education was an issue. And so focusing it on what's being talked around the kitchen table at a football game, as opposed to the big, broader national issues. That's a formula that has worked in recent years in gubernatorial races, because that's what people are electing a governor to do, is to lead their state, not necessarily be engaged in the national political discussion, the back and forth in DC. They just want a workhorse who's going to get the job done and solve the problems they're facing.
Is that why the Republican governors have had pretty good success over the years, is being able to focus on the local issues more so than the national, or localizing national narratives?
Yeah, I think if you look at our history over the last decade or so, we've got a lot of candidates in deep blue states. I mean, right next door in Maryland, or with Larry Hogan or Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, Phil Scott in Vermont, Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, and in all these situations, these candidates, when they're first candidates now as their governors, have really focused on what are the issues that they can actually solve and tackle as governor, and that's what they focused on. So you look at a state like Vermont in 2020, Phil Scott was reelected with nearly 70% of the vote when President Trump was getting in the low 20s. And so there was a large appeal there from both Democrats and independents and Greens and progressives, because obviously Vermont is a very fractured political party state. He was able to get nearly 70% of the votes just because he'd been focusing solely on the issues that they had elected him to do. And so what we always talk to our candidates about is you have to build your own brand. You can't tie yourselves to what's going on in DC or to the national party. You need to be your own candidate. You need to focus on your own image and your own brand and the issues that you can actually impact as the governor of your state.
To that line of thinking, what did Virginia get in Glenn Youngkin, or what is Virginia's political place on the map? We're not Vermont, we're not Massachusetts. Having a Republican governor in a bluish state, trending blue, maybe purple state. Maybe I think Virginia's probably a purple state, and was just reestablished as such. But what did you see in Virginia that made it possible for the Republican Governors Association to play a role?
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, we had a phenomenal candidate. The way we view races are, we operate on a 4-year cycle. And this is year 3 of that 4-year cycle. And everything leads up to next year when we have 36 gubernatorial races across the country. We have to compare every single race to what happens in that big cycle, because that's when, the majority of the governors are going to be on the ballot. And so if we find a candidate that's running a good campaign, that's focusing on the issues that matter, is able to raise money, it has a path to victory, we'll find a way to engage in that race. If there are candidates who aren't doing that, we will certainly, as best we can legally, try to get them on that right path. But then if they're not there, if there's no path to victory, we'll certainly save resources and prepare for next year again when we have 36 races on the ballot. So with Governor-elect Youngkin, we saw a candidate that had a real passion for what he wanted to do. One of the very first things that I always do when I sit down with a candidate is I ask the question, why? Why are you going to put yourself through this? Why do you want to be governor? I've been doing this for 25 years now. I can tell pretty quickly within the first 5 minutes which are the candidates that are doing it for the right reasons, and which are the candidates that don't really know why they're running for office, besides maybe the title. I did my very first call with Glenn was in August of 2020. Actually, I'm in Wisconsin today. Was actually in Wisconsin on vacation at the time when Glenn and I had our very first conversation. And within the first 15 minutes, you could tell that he had a real calling or passion to take on this challenge. And it is a challenge. I mean, serving in public office and traveling the state, it's time away from family, it's time away from your interests, time away from your friends. And so within the first 15 minutes, I could clearly see why he wanted to run, what he wanted to run, and what he wanted to try to do. And so that certainly was a big part of it. He obviously put a great campaign team together. He was on message. He was raising resources, and our modeling and our data and our polling all showed that there was a path here. And so we felt this was a great opportunity for us. And so I think what voters in Virginia and now the rest of the state will be able to see is a governor who's going to kind of bring a different perspective to the governor's office. A very business-like approach. I think if you look at a lot of our governors across the country, over the last 15 years at the RGA, some of our most successful governors have been those that the very first office they ever sought was the governorship, and they're coming in and bringing a different perspective and not this is the way it's always been, so we must do it that way approach to governing. And I think that's what we're going to get there. And he's obviously surrounded himself with some very talented people. And I think as he builds out his transition and his administration, we'll see that as well. So I think we're going to have 4 years of really solid leadership, compassionate leadership there in Richmond in the governor's office.
Okay. Virginia politics probably as well as anybody, having run statewide campaigns and having been so close to this particular campaign. Where do you see Virginia relative to other states, and what is it becoming and evolving? I don't want to say trending towards, because we've seen this pendulum swing back now. Is it the suburban domination that really is going to be a continuation of that? And is in a post-Trump era, do Republicans have a chance to have a governing majority again?
I mean, I think what we'll see is those candidates that are focusing on the issues that they can have an impact on are going to be successful. I think that will certainly play out here in Virginia. Obviously, I haven't followed it quite as closely. It does appear that we got the House majority back on election night. We'll have to certainly see what does the next 2 years look like. Are the members of the House going to have to run again next year and then again in 2023? I think that certainly it will impact what the conversation is on policy on issue, and that's not something that most governors are going to have to deal with in their first 2 years in office is having a constant campaign cycle for the legislature. But I do think where Virginia is it's a place that it is unique in all 50 states. Having done now races in almost I've done governor's race now in all 50 of them, and by the time next year runs around, I'll have done it twice in every state at least. Virginia is very different because of its proximity to Washington D.C. It doesn't necessarily have the same economic trends that some other states do, simply because of the federal government and a very stable workforce in Northern Virginia, which means a very stable tax base in Richmond. And so it doesn't necessarily have the same economic fluctuations that a state like a Kansas or a Wisconsin will have. And so I think what that means and what ultimately happens is it's an environment where there's a very different issue set. So this year it was education. You look back a couple of years ago, transportation was always the hot button issue when it came to statewide gubernatorial races. And so I think, how Virginia trends locally, I think is a little bit differently than where it trends nationally. We'll certainly see what happens over the next few weeks and months. We'll obviously have the redistricting. We'll see what competitive races we may have in Virginia. But I think it kind of is, to your point, Chris, it is a purple state, a state where I think voters on the gubernatorial level, legislative level are looking for more solutions and less of the partisanship we see out in DC. And look, the other part of that is some of the voters that do live, particularly in the Washington media market, they all work and live in DC, and that's part of their daily lives. And so when they do come home, they don't necessarily want to have that as their focal point when they're talking about who's running for House of Delegates or for governor.
Yeah, I guess the translation up to the national level, can Virginia be a presidentially competitive state? And are the Senate races going to be competitive in 24 and 26? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think for the Senate races, it all comes back to who are our candidates, and what are the messages that they're driving. I honestly haven't looked that far. I haven't looked past Tuesday, honestly, in Virginia, and what may come. That was obviously the sole
Gut
priority.
feel, though. I mean, gut feel.
I think with the right candidates, it can be competitive, and are the situations in our Senate seats are Mark Warner and Tim Kaine both going to run for another term? Right. Mark Warner's now been there for he'll be done with 2 terms, or is he's wrapping his third term?
He's in his third.
Yeah. So is he going to run again, or is that going to be an open seat environment? Same thing with Senator Kaine. Does he run again? And so I think that obviously has some implications on the environment. Look, it was an open seat. Both the 2 of the races that we won at the top of the ticket this year were open seat environments. That's typically where you see the greatest flips occur in party from one party to the other, is in those open seat environments. I think you look at the Attorney General's race. That's the first. Jason Miyares has obviously won that race. That's the first time an incumbent Attorney General has lost in Virginia since 1885. That's it's very difficult to defeat incumbents, and so in an open seat environment, whether it's an open seat at the presidential level, congressional level, or U.S. Senate level, I think that will have a big impact on whether or not these races are competitive going forward. I think they can be. I think Governor-elect Youngkin has shown a path and how to do that. But again, it comes down to who are the candidates and what are the messages that they're driving.
Yeah, when you look at the statewide races and the open seats, and we look at Warner and Kaine, they really built their brands on being the moderate, pro-business, fiscally conservative Democrat, inoffensive. They're not wild-eyed progressives, and they don't go too far out of the lane that they really built the majority here in Virginia. Do you see politically states like Virginia, when they go too far in the progressive lane, and the next crop of statewide candidates for Democrats are probably going to be progressive and to the left of Warner and Kaine? I mean, I just follow the trend line here. And does that jeopardize their brand in Virginia, capturing the California Democrats, or the New York Democrats, Illinois Democrats, and the like?
Sure. Well, I know that this morning, Congresswoman AOC came out and said the reason Terry McAuliffe lost was because he didn't run as a progressive, and is encouraging people to be much more progressive in how they run for office, and that she wasn't invited to come in and campaign, and that's why Terry McAuliffe lost. I hope that's advice that everybody listens to when they run for campaigns next year. Again, I think to your point, when I think a lot of the issues, whether it was the parole board or some of the actions that the legislature took this past year, certainly became campaign issues. And I think to your point, if it goes too far to the left, I think there is a pushback, and potentially too far to the right as well.
And that's what we've seen in Virginia politics for Republicans, haven't they? They built their brand, they were successful, and through all the charge towards the gates of the nomination for statewide office, that just kept going further and further and further to the right, and it was ultimately rejected.
Right.
And I think is that the danger zone for Democrats?
I think it just goes back to in this race in particular, Terry made it all about national issues and talked very little about what was going on in Virginia. I have a stat I'll have to pull up. I don't have it in front of me, where what did he actually push out on Twitter over the last 10, 15 days of the race. We were getting a daily update of keywords and word clouds of what was going out. Very few of it was about local issues. Okay. It was all about national issues and more of the far left, the far left agenda. And so I do think that there is a balance that has to take place there.
And I think there's a level of authenticity you just can't create. I know you got short time with Dave Rexrode. Executive Director, Republican Governors Association, joining us from Milwaukee. If anyone has a question, throw it in the chat or shoot me a text. I do want to respect his time because he's a longtime friend, and we're just so blessed to be able to have him here today. But I don't want to get away from your questions that you might have for really one of the great political operatives in the country right now. Very successful, very successful. While they come up with one, Dave, successful gubernatorial transitions are critical to the first year of success. How do you think the Youngkin campaign will transition?
I think they are going to take a very systematic approach that obviously Governor-elect Youngkin has really focused on kind of what his day one game plan was going to be. I think you'll see a lot of his transition be focused on that. And we'll kind of see how that unveils. Obviously, he's meeting with Governor Northam today. That's the first step in that process. And I think over the next few weeks, we'll see a very clear direction on how he's going to go with his administration.
What did you see behind the scenes when you were operating? What did you see? Where did you see the campaign turning? Because it wasn't a dramatic turn. It was a consistent downturn against the Biden numbers, and then it just sort of accelerated at the end of August, September. Was it Afghanistan? Was it the debate?
Sure. Well, if you kind of go back and look, as the governor-elect has said on many occasions, when he first got in this race, he had a 2% name ID with a 3% margin of error. And so if you kind of really go back and look, he went up on television very early in the summer to start defining himself to the voters, to introduce himself to voters. And so when you kind of got to the end of August was when it was really the first time that a majority of voters in Virginia had formed an opinion of him. And so the more that people got to know him, the more they got to see him and understand who he was and why he wanted to run. I think that was a big part of that shift. One of the things that we tell all of our candidates, particularly in blue and purple states, is that in order to be successful, you've got to have your favorable image as close to 50% as you possibly can. In this case, I told them that his image needed to be at 48 fave going into election day to win. And both of our polls and everything else we saw, he had exceeded that about 2.5 weeks ago. And so I think by the time we got to late August is when the kind of the foundation of who Glenn was and what he wanted to do had kind of been laid, which then allowed him to pivot more to the issue set and obviously to the eventual contrast of a different view for the state. And so, going into the summer months, most folks didn't know who he was. And so I think once they felt comfortable with him, once they understood, kind of what his values were and what he wanted to do as governor, I think that was a part where the race was able to pivot. Obviously the national mood can impact the race. And obviously I think the president's numbers certainly didn't hurt. But I do think it was, Glenn getting out there early and introducing himself was really one of the smart strategic moves the campaign did, not waiting until Labor Day to kind of introduce himself to the voters.
And you all saw this opportunity in Virginia when did you go, this is a chance. We've got a real chance here to win this seat?
Sure. I mean, we were polling about every 2 to 3 weeks. We'd modeled the state. We'd kind of built out a system of, who are the swing voters that we would certainly need to get to come in for Glenn. Those were those voters we were keeping a very close eye on. We sat down with him out at an RGA event in July and kind of got a better sense of how the campaign was going and what the game plan was. And so, it was early August when we saw our numbers start to move. Obviously, Glenn had been up for a little while. We started to see his image improve. And that's when we kind of really started to see that there was a chance here, really started to engage. And then obviously, I think Afghanistan and the challenges that the administration had there certainly escalated the turn of events. But we'd started to see a slow and steady downhill progression on voters who thought the state was heading in the right direction over the summer.
Right.
We certainly saw that at the national level. And it all kind of culminated in late August with Glenn having introduced himself, everything that happened in Afghanistan, kids going back to school and folks and parents realizing, just how far behind some of their students were having been out for a while.
Yeah.
It all kind of just came together right around Labor Day, and that I think really when the race really took off.
The reason I bring that up is for the audience in particular is to understand how early in the process things have to occur before voting takes place. And all of these decisions are so much earlier than people recognize in politics, and how that functions, and the timing throughout the calendars is extraordinarily important.
And particularly this year, with early voting taking place for the first time in a gubernatorial race, those ballots were taking place, dropping 45 days out.
Right.
Whereas in years past, you can make some of those decisions later and later. You could wait till Labor Day to make those investments or those decisions. Obviously our timeline was accelerated this time because voters were going to start voting, and we need to be engaged and talk to those folks. Now, granted, the vast majority of them didn't vote till later in the cycle, but we had to be prepared.
Right.
For that mid-September election day. So voters had to know who he was and had to know where the races were and the issue sets were by that point.
Where, insofar as that new reality of early voting, how did Republicans adapt to it here in Virginia? There was a big advantage for Democrats nationally, and the last time in 2020, especially here in Virginia. Did Republicans make up ground? And were those and people who vote early, are they just really partisan people who decide that they're going to do it? Is there a real advantage at the end? And what's the net?
I think overall, more of the partisans are the ones that vote early. The lower interest voters obviously wait till later. If you have a hard opinion of a candidate, that's who's going to show up. I still have to go through and look at our final modeling. I mean, our final modeling, at least from what I saw, was coming in. When President Trump ran last year, about when he ran for last year, about 48% of his total vote came in early vote, and about 52% came on election day. Whereas Joe Biden last year, 75% of his vote came in early vote, only 25% came on election day, and Donald Trump lost that 33 to 67. It was a pretty wide margin in that early vote. At least our models, what we were seeing in Virginia this year was going to dramatically close that gap. We were closer to 40-60, so almost cut that deficit in half. And there was a large emphasis put on that. I think the Republican Party of Virginia and the field program was really focused on that after Labor Day as well, to target voters that may not necessarily have participated in off-year elections in the past, and make sure that they were given the tools and the information on how to participate in early vote. And so I think they got a lot of credit for really driving those voters as well. So look, in a very close election, there's about 1,000 things that may have led to a victory. But if one of those things is removed, then that certainly could have changed the dynamic of the race. Is
early voting a sign of enthusiasm? Yes or no?
I think it depends on which segment of the voters you're looking at. For us, we were more focused on the low propensity Republicans and Democrats. Are they turning out? What level are they turning out? What counties are they turning out in? That was something that I was more focused on. That was a report that I was looking at each morning when we got the upload from state board elections as to who had voted. Obviously, we don't know how they voted, but we had their name and information. And we were able to run it through our model and project how we thought things were going. And so we are more focused, and the numbers that I was looking at daily were the low propensity voters, those that typically don't vote in gubernatorial elections. What percentage were able to get to actually vote early to try to bank those votes.
Right. Got a couple questions here in the chat. Youngkin is the first governor in contemporary times to come to office not having been involved in previous political office, therefore are vulnerable to those who have a lot of ties, good and bad. What do you see as the best path for Glenn to ensure he puts the best team in place, pulling the best available from Democrats and Republicans to govern well?
Sure. I think it's going to go back to his background as an outside businessman. I think he's going to look for those individuals who are best qualified to serve. And is going to really dive into those backgrounds, and so I think that's the kind of approach that he's going to take to it. Well, I mean, at the same time, Terry McAuliffe had never served in office either before he was elected governor. And look across the country, again, we're seeing more and more of these folks running for office for the first time at governor and having great success. So I think that's a quality that Glenn is going to bring, where he's going to kind of bring his experience. And, look, he understands, what it takes to run large successful companies. Obviously, that's what he did at Carlisle. And so he understands and appreciates how important it is to find good, balanced folks who are able to lead agencies or companies, and so I think that's something that Virginia voters will be able to trust him to be able to do very successfully.
Great. From Wyatt Durrett, what are your thoughts on a somewhat counter narrative that for Republicans there was a quote perfect storm unquote in Virginia with all the national problems for Biden and his cratering, plus a charismatic candidate who mastered the tightrope with Donald Trump and McAuliffe's mistakes, especially the parent comment playing into the already education cauldron. The Republican candidates should have done much better, and that the closeness of the race really demonstrates how tough Virginia is for Republicans.
Okay, I think it was, look, this is the most expensive gubernatorial race that has ever taken place in Virginia. If you look at the numbers, the Democrats actually outspent us, despite, Governor-elect Youngkin's resources going in. They outspent us statewide on television, statewide on digital quite substantially, both obviously at the gubernatorial level, but if you look at the LG and the AG, we were dramatically outspent in those races as well. And so I think that all these races come down to candidate quality, and on election day, you have choice of candidate A or candidate B or candidate C or candidate D. And that anytime we have an opportunity to have a good candidate that has a compelling message, I think we have an opportunity to win a race. Look, again, to your point, national trends can certainly move races a little bit, but at the end of the day, having a candidate that was really driving on the messages that the voters of Virginia really cared about, I think had the biggest impact in this race.
Is there one issue? I'm going to make this the last one. I know you got to go. Is there one issue that you go, that one we can use in other states? You kind of go because you got a lot of states coming up this year in the 22 cycle, and you've got to go. Folks, Virginia gave us an opening on this one.
So I think gubernatorial races are very different because the issues that are impacting states are very, very different. I mean, if you look at a state like New Mexico, frankly, it's the border security crisis down there. That's the number one issue in New Mexico because of what's happening at the border. That's not the same issue set that folks are going to have in Vermont next year. In Vermont, it's the fact that it's an aging population. People are leaving the state. So how do they continue to grow their economy and diversify their economy to be able to continue to prosper as a state? So in Vermont, it's all about economics and job retraining, whereas in New Mexico, it's law enforcement and spikes in crime. And so I think a lot of folks are going to try to take a lot. I've already seen some of the hot takes. I on the flight out this morning, I was reading my clips. It's amazing all the hot takes that are coming out of this race and how they're going to be applying to everybody across the country. Again, I think there's a couple key issues that different candidates may take a look at, but I don't think it's an aha moment that this is the issue that's going to flip control of the House or allow us to win, pick up a bunch of gubernatorial races. At least on our side, it's all local issues. It's what are the issues that drive the voters in a particular state. Look at Virginia, New Jersey. Very different, same environments. Obviously, they're still counting votes in New Jersey, but there it was all about taxes. The whole campaign was really driven about taxes, where obviously that wasn't the case in Virginia as much. And so, again, I think at least at the gubernatorial level, it's more driven by those issues that folks are talking about, sitting at the football game on Friday night or when folks are over at a bonfire and sit at the back porch, around the fire pit, just talking on a Saturday night.
Okay. Hey, Dave, really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, taking time off to discuss what happened in your home state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the election. I know you're a happy man this week for the win you got here in Virginia, Republicans, for the Republican Governors Association. This was not one you projected winning this time last year, I'm sure. And I just hats off to you and the RGA for the job well done, just from the nuts and bolts of politics, the machinery, if you will. We're nonpartisan here, but I know this was a big win for RGA, and congratulations to you and your team.
It was, look, it was the best. We spent a little over 14 million in Virginia. We'll obviously be the top donor to the governor-elect's race and the top donor in the state. But we're happy to see him win and what he's going to be able to do for these next 4 years.
Well, thanks a lot, Dave. Successful journey back home from Milwaukee. Take care.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
I'll stay on, folks. You can stick on. Dave's got to go. I want to honor his time. But if you have any questions that you want to continue, please feel free. But Dave's busy and traveling, and just can't thank him enough for being a part of this one. So if you have any questions, you can throw it in the box, or we'll just sign off. Anything coming up? Nothing? You can come on. You can turn off your mics. Go on mute. If not, all right. Appreciate it. Everyone have a great day.